Ruby lips cracked from the dry wind of Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, as Penelope Vaughn pressed a fake smile onto her face. It was 1876. The nation had just celebrated its centennial, and here she was 22 years old, widowed and standing in the shadows beside the Golden Spur Saloon with a 6-month-old baby waiting back in her rented room. The jingle of coins in the tin cup beside her bed had grown faint, and desperation had led her here, to this alley, where men with whiskey on their breath would pay 2 bits for a kiss and more for things she refused to give. "Just a kiss, mister," she whispered to the balding drummer who approached, his wedding ring glinting in the lamplight. "Nothing more." The man paid, took his kiss, and vanished into the night as Penelope wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. 3 more coins and she could buy milk and bread for little Thomas. 3 more strangers' lips against her own. Down the dusty street, Jackson Attwood dismounted from his chestnut stallion, stretching his tall frame after the long ride. At 30, he'd built his cattle ranch 10 miles outside of town into something respectable, something that would have made his late father proud. His spurs jingled against the wooden sidewalk as he made his way toward the hotel, planning to spend the night before heading back to the open range tomorrow with supplies. He never noticed the slender woman in the shadows, counting coins in her palm as if they were gold nuggets instead of mere pennies. The baby's wail pierced the thin walls of the boarding house as Penelope rushed through the door. "Mrs. Timmons," the elderly landlady, gave her a disapproving glance from the parlor. "That child's been crying for 20 minutes, Miss Vaughn. I've got other boarders trying to sleep." "I'm sorry," Penelope murmured, hurrying up the creaking staircase. "I had to. Work late." She knew what the town thought of her, though they didn't know the half of it. The widow Vaughn, who'd arrived 6 months ago heavy with child, husband reportedly killed in a mining accident. Some believed her story, others whispered crueler tales. None of it mattered as long as she kept a roof over Thomas's head. The baby quieted as she lifted him from the makeshift crib, actually, a drawer pulled from the bureau and lined with her spare dress. His eyes, blue like her own, blinked up at her, and his tiny fist curled around her finger. "I got milk for you, little man," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "And I'll never let you go hungry. Never." Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the threadbare curtains. Penelope had barely slept, worry gnawing at her like a hungry rat. The coins from last night would last 2 days at most. Then what? As she carried Thomas down to the community kitchen to heat his milk, she overheard Mrs. Timmons talking to another boarder. "Attwood's in town, buying up more cattle, they say." "That man's going to own half of Wyoming Territory at the rate he's going," replied the other woman. "Not that I'd mind being mistress of that spread. They say he's built a proper house now, not just a cabin." Penelope paid little attention to the gossip. Rich ranchers had no bearing on her desperate existence. She focused instead on the dwindling supply of milk and the rent due in 4 days. After feeding Thomas, she wrapped him in a thin blanket and ventured outside. The general store might need help, or perhaps one of the respectable women in town needed laundry done. She tried to find honest work before, but doors closed quickly to a woman alone with a baby. Still, she had to try again. The general store was busy that morning, ranchers and townspeople stocking up on supplies. Jackson Attwood stood at the counter, checking items off a list as the proprietor, Harold Jenkins, gathered his order. 20 pounds of coffee, 50 pounds of flour, 20 of sugar, Jackson said, his deep voice carrying through the store. "And those nails I ordered." "Got 'em all, Mr. Attwood," Jenkins assured him. "And I've set aside those books you wanted. First editions just arrived from Denver." Jackson nodded. A successful rancher who read books was something of an oddity in these parts, but he'd never much cared what others thought. The bell above the door jingled, and both men glanced up as Penelope entered with Thomas bundled against her chest. She hesitated, feeling out of place among the well-dressed customers. Jenkins frowned. "Can I help you, Mrs. Vaughn? I was wondering if you needed any help in the store," she said softly. "Just a few hours each day I can stock shelves, or don't need help," Jenkins cut her off abruptly. "Business is slow this season." The lie was obvious with the store full of customers. Penelope felt her face flush as she nodded and turned to leave. Jackson watched the exchange with curiosity. The young woman's clothes were worn but clean, her posture proud despite the obvious rejection. The baby in her arms gave a small cry and she hushed him gently. "Mrs. Jenkins might need help with the mending," Jenkins added, his tone slightly softened. "She's been complaining about her eyes lately." Penelope nodded. "Thank you, I'll ask her." As she reached for the door, the baby's blanket slipped, and she struggled to adjust it while holding the door. Jackson stepped forward, holding it open for her. "Thank you," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. "Madam," he replied with a tip of his hat. Outside, Penelope blinked back tears of frustration. Mrs. Jenkins would not need help with mending. The woman had turned her away twice before. She bounced Thomas gently as she walked down the boardwalk, considering her dwindling options. That evening, she returned to her spot beside the Golden Spur, leaving Thomas with a reluctant Mrs. Timmons who charged her an extra 25 cents for the trouble. The night was cold for early autumn, and business was slow. By midnight, she had earned barely enough for tomorrow's milk. As she stood shivering in the shadows, a group of cowboys tumbled out of the saloon, laughing raucously. One spotted her and elbowed his companion. "Look there, boys. The widow's offering comfort to the lonely again." Penelope stiffened. These weren't the usual quiet men who sought a brief moment of tenderness. These were trouble. "How much for more than just a kiss, darlin'?" one called, staggering toward her. "I don't," she began, backing away. "Come on now," another said, moving to block her retreat. "We got money to spend." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest. "Please, I just need to get home to my baby." The first cowboy laughed. "Baby can wait, we can't." A hand grabbed her arm, and Penelope opened her mouth to scream when a deep voice cut through the night. The lady said no. Jackson Attwood stood a few feet away, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the saloon. He hadn't planned to visit the Golden Spur that night, preferring the quiet of his hotel room with one of his new books, but the sound of trouble had drawn him outside. "This ain't your business, Attwood," growled one of the cowboys. "I'm making it my business." Jackson's voice remained calm, but his hand rested near the gun on his hip. "Go sleep it off, boys." There was a tense moment when Penelope thought violence might erupt, but the cowboys backed down. Few men in the territory were willing to cross Jackson Attwood, whose reputation as a fair but formidable man was well established. "Wasn't worth it anyway," muttered one cowboy as they shuffled back toward the saloon. When they were gone, Penelope released the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you, Mr. Attwood." He looked at her with unexpected gentleness. "You shouldn't be out here, madam." "I have little choice," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. Jackson studied her face in the dim light. He'd heard the rumors about the widow Vaughn, but rumors were cheap in a place like Cheyenne. What he saw was a young woman with pride and determination in her eyes, despite her circumstances. "You have a safe way home?" he asked. "Yes, it's not far." She hesitated. "I need to get back to my son." Jackson nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out several coins. "For your time tonight, since those fellows scared away your customers." Penelope's first instinct was to refuse, but Thomas's face flashed in her mind. "Thank you," she said. accepting the money with as much dignity as she could muster. "Get home safe, Mrs. Vaughn." As she hurried back to the boarding house, clutching the coins, Penelope wondered how he knew her name. But then, everyone in a small place like Cheyenne knew everyone else's business or thought they did. The next morning, Penelope woke to Thomas's hungry cries. The coins from Jackson Attwood had been more generous than she'd realized in the dark enough for several days of supplies. Relief washed over her as she fed her son and made plans to visit the general store. When she arrived at Jenkins' store, she was surprised to see a "Help Wanted" sign in the window that hadn't been there the day before. With Thomas balanced on her hip, she approached the counter hesitantly. "Mr. Jenkins, I see you're looking for help after all." Jenkins looked uncomfortable. "Yes, well, seems I might need someone after all, just mornings, mind you, and you'll have to keep that baby quiet." Penelope could hardly believe her luck. "Of course. When can I start?" "Tomorrow." 8 sharp. He named a wage that was modest but fair. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. You won't regret it." As she gathered the supplies she needed, Penelope wondered what had changed the storekeeper's mind. She didn't notice Jackson Attwood watching from across the street, a satisfied expression on his face as he mounted his horse and headed back to his ranch. For the next 2 weeks, Penelope worked diligently at the general store each morning. Thomas slept in a basket behind the counter, and when he woke, she would feed and change him quickly before returning to her duties. Jenkins grumbled, but seemed satisfied with her work. The income meant she no longer needed to stand in the alley beside the Golden Spur, though it barely covered her expenses. She still took in mending when she could get it, working late into the night by candlelight after Thomas was asleep. Jackson Attwood returned to Cheyenne on a cool October day, bringing cattle to sell before winter set in. He stopped by the general store and nodded in greeting when he saw Penelope behind the counter. "Mrs. Vaughn," he said, removing his hat. "Mr. Attwood." She gave him a small smile. "What can I help you with today? Just some supplies." He handed her a list. As she gathered the items, Thomas began to fuss in his basket. "I'm sorry," she said, moving to soothe the baby. "He's teething." Jackson watched as she calmed the child with gentle words and a carved wooden ring for him to gnaw on. "How old is he?" he asked. "Nearly 7 months now." Pride softened her features. "He's growing so fast." "Strong boy," Jackson observed. "Takes after his mother in that way, I'd guess." Penelope looked up, startled by the comment. Most men paid little attention to her struggles, and those who did rarely saw strength in them. Before she could respond, Jenkins emerged from the back room. "Mr. Attwood, didn't know you were in town. Got those special order items you wanted." As the men discussed business, Penelope finished gathering Jackson's supplies. When she tallied the bill, he paid without haggling and insisted on carrying his own packages. "How are you finding the work, Mrs. Vaughn?" he asked as Jenkins went to help another customer. "It's been a blessing," she admitted, "though not quite enough." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "My housekeeper left last month, got married to a shopkeeper in Laramie. I've been looking for someone to take her place." Penelope stared at him, uncertain. "At your ranch?" "It's a proper house, not a line shack," he clarified, seeming to read her concern. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen bigger than this store. You and your boy would have your own room. Wages are good and meals included." The offer was unexpected and almost too perfect. "Why would you offer this to me, Mr. Attwood? You hardly know me." Jackson's eyes, a deep brown that reminded her of rich soil, held her steadily. "I know enough. You're hardworking and devoted to your son. My ranch hands eat like wolves and the place needs a woman's touch." He paused. "It's honest work, Mrs. Vaughn. Nothing more, nothing less." Penelope considered his words carefully. The chance to leave Cheyenne, where her reputation was tarnished no matter how she tried to redeem it, was tempting. But going to a remote ranch with a man she barely knew carried its own risks. "I would need to think about it," she said finally, "of course." He placed his hat back on his head. "I'll be in town for 3 more days. You can send word to the hotel if you decide." After he left, Penelope moved through her duties mechanically, her mind racing. Mrs. Timmons had hinted that the rent would increase next month. The store job wouldn't cover it, and winter was coming, bringing with it higher costs for fuel and food. That evening, as she rocked Thomas to sleep, she weighed her options. The boarding house was cold, the walls thin, and her future uncertain. Jackson Attwood seemed honorable, and the position offered security for herself and Thomas that she couldn't find in town. By morning, she had made her decision. She wrote a note and asked a neighbor boy to deliver it to the hotel for a penny. By noon, Jackson Attwood appeared at the general store, his expression careful but pleased. "You've considered my offer?" he asked. "I have," Penelope replied. "I accept with one condition. If the arrangement doesn't suit either of us, you'll bring me back to town." Jackson nodded. "That's fair. When can you be ready to leave?" "Tomorrow," she said, the word both frightening and liberating. "I don't have much to pack." The following morning, Penelope stood outside the boarding house with her single trunk, and Thomas bundled warmly against the autumn chill. Mrs. Timmons had seemed almost disappointed to see her go. The older woman had grown fond of Thomas, despite her complaints. Jackson arrived with a wagon rather than on horseback. He helped load her trunk and then assisted her up to the seat, handling Thomas carefully while she got settled. The baby stared at the stranger with curious eyes but didn't cry, which Penelope took as a good sign. The journey to the Attwood ranch took several hours. As they left Cheyenne behind, the landscape opened into rolling prairie dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of cottonwoods along creek beds. In the distance, the Laramie Mountains rose against the sky. "It's beautiful," Penelope murmured, taking in the vastness. Jackson nodded. "It gets in your blood. My father claimed this land 20 years ago when there was nothing but Indians and buffalo for hundreds of miles." "Is it just you now?" she asked cautiously. "My mother died when I was 12. Father passed 5 years ago." His voice held old grief, long accepted. "No siblings, just me and the hands, 5 of them full-time, more during roundup and branding." As they crested a hill, the ranch came into view. A substantial 2-story house of timber and stone stood proudly against the backdrop of distant mountains. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn completed the scene. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. "You've built all this?" Penelope couldn't keep the awe from her voice. "My father started it. I've added to it." There was pride in his tone, but not boastfulness. "That's the bunkhouse there, where the hands stay. The house is just for us. You and Thomas will have privacy." As they approached the house, a dog came bounding out to greet them, a border collie with intelligent eyes. A ranch hand emerged from the barn, waving in greeting. "That's Hank," Jackson explained. "Been with us since my father's time, best foreman in the territory." Hank approached as Jackson helped Penelope down from the wagon. "So you found us a housekeeper after all," the older man said, tipping his hat to Penelope. "Welcome to Attwood Ranch, madam." "Thank you," she replied, adjusting Thomas in her arms. "And who's this little cowpoke?" Hank asked, smiling at the baby. "This is Thomas," Penelope said. "Good strong name." Hank nodded approvingly. "Well, I'll let the boss show you around. Supper's at 6, and the boys are mighty tired of their own cooking, so no pressure." Jackson chuckled as Hank walked away. "Don't worry about cooking tonight. Martha from town sent supplies yesterday, including a stew that just needs heating." The interior of the house surprised Penelope. She had expected a bachelor's sparse quarters, but instead found a home with solid, well-crafted furniture, braided rugs over polished wood floors, and bookshelves filled with volumes. The kitchen was indeed spacious, with a large cast iron stove, a pump at the sink, and a pantry stocked with provisions. "My mother believed in comfort," Jackson explained as he showed her around, "and I've tried to maintain her standards." Upstairs, he showed her to a bedroom with a large window overlooking the prairie. A smaller adjoining room held a child's bed. "This was meant to be a nursery," he said. "Never got used. Thomas can sleep here when he's older, but for now, I thought you might want him close." Penelope fought back unexpected tears. After months of sharing a cramped boarding house room, this space felt like a palace. "It's perfect, thank you." Jackson cleared his throat. "My room is down the hall. There's a washroom between with a proper tub. The hands don't come in the house except by invitation, so you'll have your privacy." He hesitated. "I should let you get settled. I'll bring up your trunk." Left alone, Penelope sat on the edge of the bed, bouncing Thomas on her knee as she took in her new surroundings. "What do you think, little man?" she whispered. "Have we found a real home at last?" The baby gurgled in response, reaching for a patch of sunlight on the quilt. That evening, after feeding Thomas and putting him to bed in a proper crib that Jackson said had been his own as a child, Penelope made her way downstairs. She found Jackson in what appeared to be a study, reading by lamplight. "Thomas is asleep," she said from the doorway. He looked up, setting aside his book. "Good. How are you settling in?" "Well, thank you." She twisted her hands nervously. "I should discuss my duties, what you expect from me." Jackson gestured to a chair across from his. "Please sit." When she did, he continued, "The basics are simple enough. Meals for me and the hands, breakfast and supper. The men take lunch with them most days. Keeping the house clean, laundry once a week. I'm not fussy about the details." Penelope nodded. "I can manage all of that." "I'm sure you can." His voice was kind. "There's something else we should discuss, Mrs. Vaughn. I know what people in town say about you." Her face flushed with shame. "Mr. Attwood," he held up a hand. "I don't put stock in gossip. Whatever you did for your son. That speaks to your character more than anything else." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you. Here, you have a fresh start," he continued. "No one will judge you based on Cheyenne rumors. I appreciate that more than I can say." She took a deep breath. "And please, if we're to live in the same house, you should call me Penelope." A small smile touched his lips. "Penelope, then, and I'm Jackson." The first week at the ranch fell into a rhythm. Penelope rose early to prepare breakfast for Jackson and the hands, who ate heartily and complimented her cooking with genuine enthusiasm. Thomas charmed everyone, especially Hank, who carved him a small wooden horse. Jackson was often out working with the cattle or seeing to ranch business, but he made time to check on her each day, asking if she needed anything from town or help with any tasks. He was unfailingly respectful, never entering her room without permission and always knocking before coming into a room where she was working. In the evenings, after Thomas was asleep, they sometimes sat in the study. Jackson would read while Penelope mended clothing or worked on a quilt she was making for Thomas's bed. Occasionally, they talked, and she learned about his life, his education back east, his return to the ranch when his father fell ill, his dreams for expanding the operation. She shared less of herself, still guarded after months of judgment. But gradually, as October gave way to November and the first snow dusted the prairie, she began to feel safe enough to let down her walls. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a particularly cold day, Jackson looked up from his book. "You never speak of your husband," he observed, Penelope's hands stilled on her sewing. "No," she agreed quietly. "I'm sorry if I've overstepped." She shook her head. "You haven't, it's just difficult." She set aside her work and stared into the flames. There was no husband, Jackson. His expression didn't change, though she'd expected shock or disapproval. "I see. I worked as a governess in Denver," she continued, the words coming easier now that she'd started. "For a wealthy family. Their oldest son, he made promises. I believed him." Her voice caught. "When I discovered I was with child, he denied everything. His parents dismissed me without a reference." Jackson's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "And you came to Cheyenne?" "Yes. I invented a husband who died in a mining accident. It seemed easier than the truth." She couldn't meet his eyes. "I had savings, but they ran out faster than I expected. No one would hire a woman alone with a baby. Eventually, I became desperate enough to do what I did." "Just kisses," Jackson said softly. "Nothing more." Penelope looked up, startled. "You knew people talk. I've heard both the truth and the lies." His eyes held no judgment. "You did what you had to do to survive, to keep your son fed and sheltered. Most people wouldn't see it that way." "I'm not most people." He set his book aside and leaned forward. "Penelope, we all have pasts. What matters is how we face each day that comes." She felt tears welling up again. "Why are you so kind to me?" "Because I recognize strength when I see it." He smiled slightly. "And maybe because I know what it's like to be alone." That night, lying in her bed with Thomas sleeping peacefully beside her, Penelope realized something had shifted. For the first time since leaving Denver, she felt not just safe, but understood. The weeks passed, and winter settled in earnest across the Wyoming Territory. Heavy snow made travel difficult, but the ranch was well prepared with stored provisions and sturdy buildings to withstand the cold. Penelope found herself enjoying the isolation, protected from curious eyes and wagging tongues. She took pride in making the house truly comfortable, adding small touches that Jackson noticed and appreciated: fresh curtains made from fabric ordered from Cheyenne, a new arrangement of the furniture that made better use of the space, preserves from the root cellar served in ways he'd never considered. Thomas thrived in the clean air and peaceful surroundings. He began crawling, getting into everything, his laughter echoing through rooms that had been too quiet for too long. Jackson seemed fascinated by the baby's development, often sitting on the floor to play with him in the evenings, his large hands gentle as he built block towers for Thomas to knock down. One December evening, as a blizzard raged outside, Jackson returned from checking on the livestock covered in snow. Penelope helped him remove his frozen coat, concern etched on her face. "You're half frozen," she scolded, pushing him toward the fire. "Sit, I'll make coffee." He obeyed, gratitude in his eyes as he held his hands to the flames. When she returned with the steaming cup, their fingers brushed during the exchange. The simple contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire or coffee. "Thank you," he murmured. "For the coffee, and for making this place a home again." Penelope settled in the chair opposite him. "You've given us so much, it's the least I can do." Jackson studied her face in the firelight. "It's more than duty, I hope. Are you happy here, Penelope?" The question caught her off guard. Happiness had seemed like such a distant possibility for so long that she rarely considered it. But now, looking around the cozy room, hearing Thomas's soft breathing from where he slept in a basket nearby, feeling the security of solid walls against the howling storm, she knew the answer. "Yes," she said simply. "I am happy here." Something in his expression shifted, a tension releasing. "Good, I want you to be." As Christmas approached, Penelope wondered if she should get Jackson a gift. She had little money of her own, having spent most of her wages on fabric for Thomas's clothes and a few personal items. But she wanted to show her appreciation somehow. Late one night, after everyone was asleep, she took out the fine linen handkerchiefs she had brought from her days as a governess. With careful stitches, she embroidered Jackson's initials on each one, adding a small design of prairie grass and mountains that reminded her of the view from his ranch. On Christmas Eve, a special dinner was prepared for the Hands, who afterward retreated to the bunkhouse with a bottle of whiskey Jackson provided as a gift. The house was quiet as Penelope put Thomas to bed, the baby exhausted from all the attention he'd received throughout the day. When she came downstairs, she found Jackson waiting by the fire, 2 glasses of brandy poured. "I thought we might have our own celebration," he explained, offering her a glass. Penelope accepted it, then reached into her pocket for the small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you. It's not much, but—" Jackson looked genuinely touched as he unwrapped the handkerchiefs. His fingers traced the embroidery. "These are beautiful. Did you make them?" She nodded, pleased by his reaction. "I wanted to thank you for everything. I have something for you as well." He reached behind his chair and brought out a wooden box. "Open it." Inside, Penelope found a silver hairbrush, comb, and hand mirror set engraved with delicate flowers. "Jackson, this is too much." "It was my mother's," he explained. "She would have wanted a woman who appreciates beauty to have it." Penelope ran her fingers over the silver, deeply moved by the personal nature of the gift. "I'll treasure it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their brandy as the fire crackled. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. "I never expected this," Jackson said finally. "The snow on Christmas," he smiled. "No, this feeling of home. Before you came, the house was just a building. Now it's alive again." Penelope felt a flutter in her chest at his words. "I felt the same way. After so long just surviving, it's strange to feel like I belong somewhere." "You do belong here," he said, his voice low and certain. "Both of you." Their eyes met across the space between them, and Penelope saw something there that both frightened and thrilled her, a longing that matched her own growing feelings. Jackson set down his glass and moved to kneel beside her chair. "Penelope, I know it hasn't been long, but I need to tell you something. I'm falling in love with you." Her breath caught. "Jackson." "You don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know your life has been difficult and trust doesn't come easily. I just wanted you to know how I feel." She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched his face. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. After being betrayed, I promised I'd never trust a man again." She took a deep breath. "But you're different. You've shown me what a good man truly is." He turned his face to press a kiss to her palm. "May I kiss you, Penelope? Not for coins or obligation, just because I want to, more than I've ever wanted anything." In answer, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Unlike the mechanical kisses she had once traded for survival, this one was warm and real, filling her with hope instead of shame. When they parted, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to rush you. We have time." "Time," she repeated, smiling. "That's a luxury I never thought I'd have." Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the soil. Cattle that had been kept close to the ranch buildings during the worst of the weather were driven to fresh pastures. The days grew longer, and Penelope found herself watching for Jackson's return each evening with increasing anticipation. Their relationship blossomed gradually, like the wildflowers that began to dot the prairie. Jackson courted her properly, with small gifts and gestures that showed his regard, reading to her in the evenings, bringing her the first spring flowers he found, carving a rocking horse for Thomas. The baby, now nearly a year old, was taking his first tentative steps, cruising along furniture and occasionally brave enough to let go and wobble across open floor. He called Jackson Da, a development that brought unexpected tears to the rancher's eyes the first time he heard it. One warm evening in May, Jackson asked Penelope to walk with him after dinner. Thomas was already asleep, and Hank promised to listen for any cries from the house. They walked hand in hand toward a small rise that offered a view of the ranch and the mountains beyond. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and purple. "I've been thinking," Jackson said as they reached the top of the rise. "A dangerous pastime," Penelope teased, squeezing his hand. He smiled. "Perhaps, but these particular thoughts have brought me nothing but joy." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Penelope, when you first came here, I offered you a job and a home. Now I want to offer you something more." Her heart began to race as he dropped to one knee before her. "I love you," he said simply. "I love Thomas as if he were my own son. I want us to be a family, not employer and housekeeper, but husband and wife, mother and father. Will you marry me?" Tears of happiness spilled down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Jackson." He rose and gathered her in his arms, kissing her with all the passion that had been building between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold ring with a single pearl. "It was my grandmother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "My grandfather gave it to her when they homesteaded in Ohio before my father was born. It's traveled a long way to reach you." "It's perfect," Penelope said, admiring how it caught the last rays of sunlight. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by a traveling minister. The entire ranch turned out for the celebration, along with a few friends from neighboring properties. Penelope wore a new dress of blue calico, with Thomas in her arms for part of the ceremony, until Hank took him so the bride and groom could exchange vows properly. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness," Penelope whispered to Jackson as they danced under the stars that night, their guests celebrating around them. "You deserve every bit of it," he replied, holding her close. "And more." Later, after the guests had departed and Thomas was soundly asleep, they retreated to what was now their shared bedroom. Penelope had been nervous about this moment, but Jackson's gentle patience dispelled her fears. In his arms, she discovered that physical love could be beautiful and tender, nothing like the transactions she had once endured for survival. As they lay together afterward, her head on his chest, Jackson stroked her hair. "Do you remember the first time I saw you?" he asked. "At the general store." "No, before that, outside the Golden Spur." His voice held no judgment, only tenderness. "You looked so proud even then, so determined. I knew you were someone special." Penelope raised herself on one elbow to look into his face. "Is that why you helped me? Why you created that job at Jenkins' store?" He looked slightly abashed. "You knew about that," I suspected. "Jenkins changed his mind rather suddenly. I might have mentioned that my business could go elsewhere if he didn't recognize quality help when he saw it." Jackson traced her cheek with his fingertips. "I just wanted to give you a chance. You did all the rest yourself." "My hero," she said softly, only half teasing. "No," he corrected her. "You're the hero of this story, Penelope. You survived when many would have given up. You protected Thomas at any cost. I just had the good sense to recognize the treasure right in front of me." The years that followed brought changes to the Attwood Ranch. The house expanded to accommodate a growing family. Thomas was joined by a brother, William, the following year, and 2 years later by a sister, Elizabeth. Jackson legally adopted Thomas, giving him his name and treating him with the same devotion he showed his biological children. The ranch prospered under Jackson's management, eventually becoming one of the largest and most successful in the territory. Penelope took an active role in the business, keeping the accounts and offering advice that Jackson valued and implemented. As Wyoming moved toward statehood, Jackson became involved in territorial politics, advocating for women's suffrage and property rights. Penelope sometimes accompanied him to meetings and gatherings, where her intelligence and grace made her a valuable partner. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, responsible young man who showed his father's love for the land and his mother's determination. By the time he was 16, he was already taking on significant responsibilities at the ranch, eager to learn everything Jackson could teach him. On a golden autumn afternoon in 1891, 15 years after that first meeting in Cheyenne, Penelope stood on the porch of their home, watching Jackson teach Elizabeth to ride her new pony. Thomas and William were helping with the autumn roundup, their laughter carrying across the pasture as they worked alongside the ranch hands. Jackson looked up and caught her eye, smiling in a way that still made her heart skip. He excused himself from Elizabeth's lesson and walked to join Penelope on the porch. "Happy?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, taking in the scene before them, their children, their land, the life they had built together. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "I was thinking about the first day I brought you here," Jackson mused. "How nervous you were, how determined." "I was terrified," she admitted, "but also hopeful. You gave me reason to hope when I'd almost forgotten how." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You gave me a family when I thought I'd always be alone. I think we saved each other." Penelope smiled, thinking of how far she had come from those desperate days in Cheyenne. From trading kisses for coins in a dark alley to this, a life full of love, purpose, and belonging. "We did," she agreed softly, "and we keep saving each other every day." As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the land in shades of amber and gold, Jackson and Penelope Attwood stood together, surrounded by the home they had created, not just the buildings and the land, but the love that had transformed two lonely souls into a family that would endure for generations to come.